Good afternoon. Welcome to the Mid-Atlantic Regional Community of Practice Professional Training event, where we'll focus on invisible wounds of military service and the impact of military sexual trauma, also referred as MST. Today's topic was created based on feedback from you as network users and community organizations. This training is presented by Serving Together, a program of Every Mind, as part of the Regional Community of Practice efforts for the AmericaServes Mid-Atlantic region. This project was supported by a grant awarded by the Walmart Foundation to Syracuse University. And thank you all that have joined us virtually from across the Mid-Atlantic today. For those that may not know me, I am Christy Kennedy, the Senior Program Manager at Serving Together, a program of Every Mind. I, along with my team of colleagues at Serving Together, are participating today with hundreds of organizations representing the health and human service industry in the Mid-Atlantic. We know that this is a difficult time for many, both socially, emotionally, and physically. We appreciate you joining today for this very important topic and discussion on ways that we can serve our military and veteran-connected families. My backup administrator is my colleague, Jennifer Watson, who is here to support if there are any technical difficulties on my end. So thank you, Jennifer. For your awareness, Every Mind, who is hosting this event today, is a nonprofit organization out of Montgomery County, Maryland, whose mission is to strengthen communities and empower individuals to reach optimal mental wellness. We provide a variety of direct services for the entire lifespan, including 24/7 hotline, homeless outreach, school-based mental health services, and much more. We also strive to reduce the stigma surrounding mental illness and increase the importance of mental wellness for everyone. For more information, please visit our website at every-mind.org. One of our programs, Serving Together, is focused on providing resources and assistance for military veterans and their families in the National Capital Region. And among our objectives, we strive to provide education to the community to help better support service members, veterans, and their family members, as well as caregivers. Serving Together and Every Mind were selected to serve as the Regional Community of Practice Champion to support the work in the Mid-Atlantic region. The 3 AmericaServes coordination centers, and our goal is to provide education and training opportunities to our network users, from Serving Together in the National Capital Region to Mission United down in South Hampton Roads and to PA-Serves in Greater Pittsburgh. We conduct these trainings based on feedback that we've received from you, and we have more events lined up. But it is crucial we receive your feedback to provide the most requested topics that you need to be able to better serve. We will have a link provided at the end of this event whenever we finish up today to request feedback. So I encourage you, each one of you, to provide your feedback so we know how the event went today and also what future information you'd like to receive. As a reminder, this event does provide education credit for those that attend the entire training. We will also have a slide at the end of this presentation with the instructions on how to receive your certificate. So I'd first like to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Evelyn Lewis, who serves as the President and Chair of Warrior Centric Healthcare Foundation, who will provide the first portion of this discussion, the impact of military sexual trauma. We'll provide the copy of the slides following the event. We do want to provide just a little overview of Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis served over 25 years of service in the United States Navy. She earned her medical degree from the University of Health Services, the Chicago Medical School, and she is the co-founder of Warrior Centric Health, LLC, and currently serves as the Chief Medical Officer and President and Chairman at Warrior Centric Healthcare Foundation. She's also the immediate past board chairman for the National Children's Center. Her professional and research interests include the impact of culture and cultural competency on the health and healthcare outcomes, women's health, the impact of military service on service members, veterans, and their families, education and training of healthcare professionals, health management and disease prevention, community outreach and engagement, health and healthcare disparities, health policy and clinical trials, and minority participation. Dr. Lewis is nationally recognized for her experience in the areas of community outreach, engagement and enablement, veteran health and healthcare issues, content and program development and evaluation, cultural competency, health and healthcare disparities. We are honored to have her join us today to share more about this topic. And with that, I will switch over to Dr. Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, we can. You're here.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. Again, I'm Evelyn Lewis, the chair and president for the Warrior Centric Healthcare Foundation, which is the institution or organization, shall I say, that brings the presentation to you today. These are some of the objectives here that hopefully we cover during our conversation that will bring some more awareness, insights, information to you about military sexual trauma. So to begin with, we'll define it. Then we'll describe some of the common reactions that veterans have had to military sexual trauma. And then we'll look to discuss the impact of military sexual trauma on the veteran themselves, as well as their families. However, before I start with the definition, I thought that I would use a short video to be sure that we don't reduce what's happening to just numbers and statistics. And I wanted to play this for you. So 1 minute and 56 seconds, and we'll have a number of videos throughout this because I really want to lift the people who have had these experiences off the page so that we better understand who they are.
I just didn't think about it. I thought it was my fault. I pocketed that and it went into a black box and I didn't deal with it. There was no rape kit. It was his word against your word. And he was a sergeant. You know, I had just came in, so I didn't have a chance. So I didn't say anything.
There's so many men that, you know, just won't talk about it, want to, but don't know how. And I knew how that felt.
I struggled with a lot of stuff, not sleeping, anger issues, just because I wasn't dealing with anything. I was just bottling it all up. When I got out, I decided I wasn't going to let this person control my life. And so I seek services through the VA.
I was able to meet with, have a therapist, to meet with someone and be open and honest with them. I started to talk more about my military sexual trauma.
The first time I said what happened to the professional at the VA, it was like a weight was lifted, like, oh my God, finally somebody else knows besides me. It was very hard at the beginning, but once I started working with doctors and believing that these people were trying to help me, and I started trusting them, I was able to talk about this military sexual trauma. And not only that, I was able to work with those issues.
Try to talk to somebody and be honest about how you're feeling, because it's like, this is my life. And I'm worth being happy. I'm worth having peace. I'm worth having joy. I'm somebody. I make a difference.
So hopefully that paints a picture of the folks that we're going to be talking about today and not reduce them to just merely numbers. As I mentioned, I was going to start with the definition of military sexual trauma. And as you can see here, it refers to experiences, sexual assault, repeated, threatening sexual harassment, and it includes any sexual activity that is forced, i.e. against your will. The resulting acute or delayed psychological trauma obviously can be quite significant and debilitating, which is some of the things that we heard from those in the previous video. The definition that's used by the VA comes from federal law, and it refers to psychological trauma, which in the judgment of a VA mental health professional has resulted from physical assault or sexual nature, battery, sexual harassment, all of which occurred while the veteran was serving on active duty for training, or inactive duty for training. Some examples of military sexual trauma include when people are offered something in exchange for sexual favors. That might mean access that others may not have to resources, to various materials, inappropriate sexual jokes or lewd remarks, unwanted physical contact, anything that will make that person uncomfortable, such as groping or touching or grabbing, and things that are repeated threats and unwanted sexual advances account as examples of military sexual trauma. So what I'm going to talk about now is research that was done via survey by the Department of Defense. The focus was on the Iraq and Afghanistan conflict during that time. And what it shows is both the impact of military sexual trauma on both males and females. And so many people, when we initially began that dialogue around MST, immediately focus on women. And rightly so, because the numbers of the assaults and sexual harassment, et cetera, that they experience outnumber those of men, but there's still far more men who experience military sexual trauma than women, because they exist in the military in greater numbers. So as we talk about this, we need to keep both of them in mind, because it's a difficult journey for both genders. So here you see, when we look at military sexual trauma, those who have experienced harassment versus assault, and looking at men and women. And you can see men are lower on the scale in both of those categories. And again, this is within the confines of OEF and OIF, or Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. This talks about those who were deployed versus non-deployed. Many people think that some of the experiences that veterans have had occur either when they are fully deployed, i.e. they leave their duty station that stateside, and that's not necessarily true. Many of these injuries, illnesses, and diseases that occur right here within the continental United States, but obviously it certainly does also occur when you're deployed. And you can see here the differences in the sexual trauma, harassment, and assault, and what happens in both men and women when they're deployed and not deployed. And again, you can see those numbers that impact women or females are far much greater than their male counterparts. Here we're looking at combat exposed versus those who are not. Deployment doesn't always mean to a area of conflict. And so if you are deployed to an area of conflict, these numbers here are talking about those between men and women who experience MST and sexual harassment when they're deployed versus not being deployed to a combat area, excuse me. When you look at VA healthcare users versus non-users, you'll see that females use the VA healthcare system in greater numbers than their male counterparts, which is sort of a very interesting piece, because it targets MST in particular, because there have been a number of different issues surrounding females in the use of VA, because not all of them have been equipped to care for female veterans in the way that they should, in terms of having OBGYN, child care, those kinds of services readily available for them. However, when it comes to MST, those services are readily available in all the VA centers, in their hospitals, et cetera, which you'll hear a little bit more about towards the end of this discussion. So describe some of the common reactions to military sexual trauma. So we look at things like, I put these in boxes that talk about quick facts about this issue. And so we'll take a little bit of a step back and then move forward. And that step back allows us to talk about the surge of sexual assaults in the ranks. And what I'm talking about here is within the last 2 years, we've had an increase in these numbers in relationship to assaults on women. DOD puts out an annual report that's called Sexual Assault in the Military, and 20,500 instances of unwanted sexual contact occurred in fiscal year 2018. The latest report has not been published yet. But as you can see, we're getting an increase in these numbers as opposed to a decrease, wherein the military has spent countless dollars, if you will, on studying this issue and looking at how it can be decreased. You've had an increase of 38%, again, from the previous survey in 2016. And you look at men and women across all of the services, it shows that assaults on men in the military remain flat, while assaults on women recorded their biggest increase in years. And that becomes another topic of conversation, because women now make up only 20% of the military, but they're the target of 63% of the assaults. It mostly occurs in those who are young and low ranking. However, Max Sally, who is a senator, Republican senator right now, revealed her story earlier, late 2019, of her being assaulted, and she was the first one in the Air Force to fly combat missions. And so it doesn't always happen to the youngest and lowest ranking. Again, that step back allows us to see perhaps where the beginnings of some of these things come from. And so we can see here claims that sexual assault increased at the military academies. And this becomes important because that's where we are growing those folks who are going to assume those roles in the future Iraqs and Afghanistan, if you will. So according to this, unwanted sexual contact was increased 50% since 2016 within our military academies. Again, you can see the incidence was higher in females than it was for males. And the rate of reporting of these incidents, though, has remained steady, which means that there are still people who feel like when this kinds of activities occur, that they cannot report them for fear of any number of repercussions or backlash. 50% of the women, 16% of the men experience sexual harassment. And again, you can see that there's failure to report this, because during that same time that those numbers occurred, only 7 complaints were made to leadership. An estimated 1 in 4 veterans who go to the VA healthcare system report experiencing MST. And I want to make sure that you understand that that's a very important point when we talk about female veterans in the VA healthcare system, because if we're talking about 1 in 4 there, you can only imagine what those numbers truly are if we were able to fully account for female veterans who were seen in the civilian sector. Unfortunately, we don't have any way of clearly measuring that, because as a veteran myself, I retired in 2003, and I have never been asked by my provider if I served, if I'm a veteran. That question has never been asked. So any of the issues that I was being seen for while they're in their office, would they know might be associated with or affiliated with or caused by my service. And so that's a very important feature, which when talking with veterans, or if you're a veteran service organization that works with veterans, particularly around these issues, it's an important point to make to them that if they're being seen in the civilian sector, they really need to bring this out to their providers. Again, the data shows that the MST is on the rise. There's very little reporting or significant delay in reporting. Some don't do it until long after the assault has occurred. And when I say long, that can be 10, 15, 20 years later before they reveal what happened to them to anyone else. You see, I have highlighted there in bold, they go to providers in the community. But again, many don't reveal even to them what's happened. And so they may begin to get treatment for PTSD long before they get treatment for their MST, because that's what's visible to the provider. And then you can see here, sexual assault has a larger impact on PTSD symptomatology than any other trauma, and that includes combat exposure. So someone could be in a conflict area, Iraq, Afghanistan, Gulf War, Gulf II, and see their colleagues, their buddies killed, dismembered by an explosion, and we consider that significant trauma. However, sexual assault has a larger impact on whether or not that person develops PTSD and how severe that PTSD may be experienced by them. So you heard me mention earlier also that we cannot leave out that this event also happens with men. And there are certain make it difficult for them to talk about these experiences or live with them. And as you can see here, we talk about this can't happen to me. When most people think about sexual assault, they do not think about men sexually assaulting men for the most part. They think of men or males and females. Men feel like they can't talk about it because this is not something that's supposed to happen to them. They feel less of a man after it happens, and oftentimes not like a man at all. They try to move on and forget it, but that's a common characteristic regardless of the gender. And many, as I mentioned, take a really long time before they get to the place where they can reveal what's happened. And so many may begin to feel like it's too late to actually talk about it or reveal it to anyone else. And so therefore there's no help. And also, particularly on the male side, because we oftentimes look at men as being stronger and able to fight off attacks, etc., more so than a female might be against another male. They will often say they should have been able to stop it. It was their fault. This is a collage of men who have experienced sexual trauma, if you will. And I'm going to read to you just a few of their stories. Some of the stories that we'll discuss on the side of the females, we'll see in videos, but these would have been far, far too long. But I wanted you to get a snippet of what was going on with them in terms of their experience with military sexual trauma. Let me go back here. Excuse me. So if you look at the gentleman right up at the top here, Jack Williams, who's 71. His story is one that he felt once it happened and he went to talk to someone, they said to him, if you report this, no one will believe you. Air Force drill sergeant told him that in boot camp, because this is where this happened. So it was 2 a.m. in the morning in the sergeant's office that the sergeant choked him to the point that he passed out. He was 18 years old. And then he raped him over a desk while dozens of other recruits slept in the next room. That was in 1966. And so at that time, for sure, because you even see the fear from people now trying to report these issues, the fear at that point in time was overwhelming. There was no response or preventive programs at that time, some of which exist today. And there were no protections for troops who reported these. Homosexuality was not just forbidden in the ranks, but it was looked at as a national security threat during those days. Then if we look at the gentleman who's sitting on the floor there with the young lady trying to comfort him, he was pushing a cart in the grocery store through the supermarket near his home, looking for light bulbs when he stopped to sniff a variety of scented candles on one of the shelves. And then suddenly his hands were over his face and he sank to the floor and began to cry and sob. And that happened because the smell of one of those candles smelled just like the shampoo he'd been using in the shower at the Army Basic Training in 2007 when he was beaten and raped by another recruit. So you can see there are triggers all around, many of which we would not even suspect. Then you look at at Billy. He spent time in the Army, and he feels like those were the worst that he'd ever, worst years of his life. This is the man that you see on your far left with his arms folded. If we had sort of a playback system, I would ask you all, how many of you remember a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Dahmer? If you do, you'll recall that he was arrested and confessed to raping and killing 17 young men and boys, some of whom he dismembered and ate. Well, this was Capshaw's roommate when he was in the Army. He describes the heavy metal posters that Dahmer decorated the room with, the jokes that he told, etc. But he also recalls the vials of lorazepam and ketamine that Dahmer often used to sedate him. Metal bar, he said, that Dahmer used to beat him. And motor pool rope that he would tie him down with. And so some of those wounds and scars are still visible on the outside, but it was nearly 40 years before this gentleman told anyone else about his story. The young man you see with his teeth there, they're like that because he can't go to the dentist. He can't stand anyone in his space that close to him. So he just doesn't go and just doesn't do those things. The gentleman you see at the left-hand bottom side of your screen, I'm going to play a video from of him talking about his reporting, his experience, because he is someone who revealed his story, if you will, to two of the colleagues who run the organization that you'll hear about at the end of my presentation.
Reluctantly, I reported assault in 1999. However, due to don't ask, don't tell, it took a while to kind of find the perpetrator. And when I started the recovery there, I met with a chaplain, and unfortunately, the chaplain's first words to me were, "There's only so much you can tell me before I'd have to report it." And then also would pull out a rubber band and say, "This is what happens when you engage in homosexual activity," and proceeded to break the rubber band. And so my recovery journey started and ended that day. And when I was discharged and was home, I told my mom. I only told her that something had happened. I never told her what happened. Told her what I experienced until my third suicide attempt in 2011. And from there, I kind of had a spiritual awakening. But I also had to go to jail. So my recovery period started in jail with a VA social worker named Kathy Munson, who spent 3 hours and 45 minutes with me as I told for the first time in great detail living the nightmare I've been living for the past decade. And so that's when my recovery journey really started. Like others, I have grave trust issues. I didn't necessarily go into the VA system until 2013. And I still was kind of having the stigma being a male survivor at that time.
So again, some additional MST facts as it relates to men. One of the things that really stands out about them is they have uncontrollable biological reactions. And what we're talking about there are erections or ejaculation that occurs also during MST. But it does not mean that they wanted it or enjoyed it. It is just a reaction, if you will, that they can't control. It also doesn't indicate anything about their sexual orientation. And so their background and identity, very much like race, age, religion, etc., and abuse or trauma prior to military service can also affect their reactions to MST. And that piece right there is also very important, and it plays out significantly more substantially when we're talking about female veterans who've experienced MST. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper here as we move forward. As we talk about females, they comprise about 2.2 million members of the armed forces. It's a growing number. 16%, and it is the fastest growing sector of the active duty military to date, which also should raise the hair on the back of our neck, because if they're the ones who are experiencing this at far greater rates and they're growing in faster numbers, that may be an indication of significant problems to come. Story behind the faces, and so a couple of these faces you've seen already, but we're going to have a few additional videos with some of them in there as they relate the stories around the experience they had with MST.
Service member who may have experienced military sexual trauma or may be experiencing it now, what would you tell them?
One of the first things that I would say is, number one, it's not your fault. It is not your fault. And number two, we believe you. And to forgive yourself, it's not your fault. So stop being so hard on yourself. Those are the things that I would initially say.
That's really powerful. Thank you, Tim.
Timothy, you took the words right out of my mouth. It was like you were reading my mind. That's the first thing I would say. No matter what, it's not your fault. There's no other way to say it. You know, no matter what the situation was, how severe, no matter what, it's not your fault. And it's okay to take your time and not talk about it until you are ready.
So again, as we look deeper into female veterans, you can see here what I was talking about or referring to a little bit earlier. There are much higher rates of interpersonal trauma, military sexual trauma, intimate partner violence in the female sector. And it is those things that increase their risk of additional, or shall I say more intense trauma from military sexual trauma experience. One of the studies put prevalence of traumatic histories in female veterans at 81 to 93%. So childhood trauma, whether it was physical or sexual, sexual assault or physical assault in adulthood, and again, with domestic violence. Also, to reiterate that it's military sexual trauma doesn't only occur during training or peacetime. It also occurs in conflict areas in theater, as you can tell from the survey that we spoke about earlier on. And the stress of war in and of itself may be one of the reasons for seeing increases in rates of sexual harassment and assault. And you can see there was research done here by Wolf and her colleagues when we look at the Gulf War, where they found higher rates than they typically found in peacetime of sexual assault, physical sexual harassment, and also verbal sexual harassment. Difficulty with relationships and social functioning. You can only imagine that after you've had such an experience, those kinds of things would be very much a part of your daily living. And again, the abuse triggers, trust issues, problems with social activities, sexual function, challenges with guilt, shame, anger. You heard those things mentioned from a number of folks that were speaking on the videos that we were looking at. And then difficulty finding or maintaining work because of that anger, shame, and guilt, interfering and disrupting, if you will, their daily ability to function. Some of the actual physical health problems that we can see from those who've experienced military sexual trauma, obviously sexual dysfunction is one of those. Chronic pain, weight gain, eating problems, eating disorders are somewhat significant in that population. GI problems, again, some of them stemming from eating disorders. Difficulty with attention, their ability to concentrate, their ability to remember particular pleasant memories, and then trouble staying focused frequently finding their mind wandering, which also contributes to their inability to maintain employment. PTSD, you heard me talk about this earlier, in that it is one of the larger disorders that are associated with or closely associated with military sexual trauma. It's a higher lifetime rate of PTSD in those who've had military sexual trauma. It can also significantly engage depression and other mood disorders, including substance misuse, and it's higher correlation of drug and alcohol misuse in those who've experienced military sexual trauma. And it can be up to 10 times as high for those who've experienced sexual assault. Additional medical and mental health conditions, as you might imagine, due to image or the way you feel about yourself, you can experience either obesity, overeating to sort of block things out, or not eating to suppress those memories, and then you would end up with weight loss. You also can experience things like chronic pulmonary disease, liver disease, hypothyroidism, and other mental health conditions. So when we talk about these reactions, particularly as it relates to PTSD, it's a progressive event, if you will. So when this experience initially happens, obviously there's an acute stress reaction, which is immediate. You've just been assaulted, so you have a stress reaction that occurs quite immediately after the experience. Then that acute stress reaction evolves into a disorder, and that can take up to a month or a little over a month to occur. Once that stress disorder develops, if it persists, if that person doesn't get help, doesn't discuss this, bottles it up, as you've heard some people talk about, it becomes an acute PTSD experience, and that happens typically 1 to 3 months after the sexual assault. And you heard me mention before that because a lot of people won't talk about MST when they're seen, whether it's at the VA or in the civilian sector, but again, probably a lot more frequently in the civilian sector, if they're not revealing the issues surrounding that sexual assault or sexual trauma, they will be having or experiencing PTSD, which is what they will be treated for or what gets picked up, as opposed to the actual cause of why they have this PTSD. And after that 1 to 3 months, you evolve to what we call chronic PTSD. It says 3 months and beyond, but it can take longer to develop. And obviously, when we talk about being chronic, we mean it's a prolonged period of time, which can be significant in terms of years. Consequences, the rates for PTSD for sexual assault are higher than those for combat. We mentioned that 46% of females who've been assaulted, again, will report PTSD symptoms. A lot of that, and the reason that the percent is so high, is because of previous trauma that they've experienced, whether it's been childhood or adult physical or sexual trauma or domestic violence. Sexual assault survivors are more likely to use drugs, which we mentioned a little bit earlier also. And you can see they're 3 to 4 times more likely to use marijuana, 6 times more likely for cocaine, and up to 10 times more likely for hard drugs. And there are also people who will easily find themselves in situations or in relationships, quote unquote, where there's domestic violence and, again, additional sexual victimization. So we've sort of defined it. We've talked about the reactions or symptoms that are a part of this this experience. So now we're going to talk a bit more about the direct impact of it on service member or the veteran themselves, as well as their family.
That service member who may have experienced military sexual trauma or may be experiencing it now, what would you tell them?
One of the first things that I would say is, number one, it's not your fault. It is not your fault. And number two, we believe you. And to forgive yourself. It's not your fault. So stop being so hard on yourself. Those are the things that I would initially say.
That's really powerful. Thank you, Tim.
Timothy, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's like you were reading my mind. That's the first thing I would say. No matter what, it's not your fault. There's no other way to say it. You know, no matter what the situation was, how severe, no matter what, it's not your fault. And it's okay to take your time and not talk about it until you are ready.
Many of you might say that was deja vu because you'd seen that before, and you're correct. You did see it before, but there was a reason to re-emphasize that because, again, they stress, do not blame yourself. It was not your fault. Go easier on yourself. And those things are very important pieces because those are the things that keep people from reporting things up to 10, 20, 30, and as you heard me mention earlier on, 40 years later about what they experienced. So as we look at the impact again, we talk about military sexual trauma being an experience and not a diagnosis or a mental health condition. Those things come into play when it impacts them in a way that they then have PTSD or mood disorders, eating disorders, substance abuse disorders, et cetera. Those are where the diagnoses come in and the mental health conditions evolve. There are a variety of reactions that veterans have in response to military sexual trauma, and the type and severity and duration are related to factors like whether or not they had a prior history of trauma. Again, you find that more often so in women than men. The types of responses that they had from other people when they received or when they experienced that MST, and whether the MST was a one-time event or repeated over time. And you heard from the first video where once she, got to her unit, it was something that was experienced over time. It happened again and again and again. Again, also post-traumatic stress disorder commonly associated with MST, and other diagnoses can evolve from that. As we mentioned, impaired health status, depression, and an increased number of various physical symptoms. Factors may be unique to in military sexual trauma within the military service. We know that when you think about being in the military, it's a bit of a club, of a family, and the way people function, they're this unit. There's this unit cohesiveness. And if you were to do something, say something, or indicate something that might cause unit erosion, then you will be stigmatized. And so because of that fact, that's one of the other reasons why it's a unique aspect of sexual trauma for those who are in the military, because they may have to continue to live and work with the person who's assaulting them over and over again and rely on them for things like their food, healthcare, watching their back when they're on patrol. You can only imagine if you are threatening to report someone who is your boss, if you will, and you're in Iraq and they send you on patrol. What would happen if you're threatening them with revealing what's happening? So those are some of the unique kinds of situations that we find related to military sexual trauma within the military. Damaging team spirit, I mentioned that sort of erosion of unit cohesion. Worried about appearing weak or vulnerable. That's important on both sides, whether you're talking about men or women. Men don't want to appear weak. Women don't want to appear vulnerable and lose the respect of their battle buddies. You may also thought or think that if others find out, would it end your career or your chances for promotion? And oftentimes, those are the kinds of things that are used to blackmail people into participating in the first place. The experience of military sexual trauma can put service members in a no-win situation, which can be definitely emotionally difficult. for them to resolve. So if you look at standing at the intersection of military sexual trauma, the veteran, and the family, because the veteran themselves they're not the only person that is impacted by this once it happens to them. And so the video you're going to see here, it is of a family. There are no children involved, but there are two people. And the reason I chose this video is because it brings in a lot of the various issues that we will talk about in any family relationship. And it's complex in a number of different ways, but I think it will provide that perspective that we're looking for in terms of the impact on family members.
My name is Tracy. I was an animal care specialist while I was in the military. Basically, we take care of the military working dogs. You can get stationed anywhere. I think I had the best duty assignment.
My name is Maggie, and I'm married to Tracy. I first met Tracy on the rugby pitch. She was playing for the other team.
We met, we became good friends, and you know, we ended up getting together, and we've been together for about 6 years. There's usually some type of stereotype about women in the military. You can be seen as being promiscuous or being kind of stuck up and unavailable to everyone. Usually with that, the rumors fly in about, you know, well, this person isn't dating me or is not interested in me because she's gay. But as long as I could do my job, I kept my nose clean, I was a hard worker, people knew I did above and beyond. I really wasn't bothered too much. My MST, military sexual trauma, happened pretty early on in my military career. Basically, I was kind of blackmailed into the situation. My so-called friends found out that I'm gay, and they kind of said, well, you know what, we'll go ahead and keep your secret a secret, but, you know, there's some things you have to do for us. I'm not proud of what I did, but it was kind of what I had to do. In 2002, 2003, we deployed to the Middle East. A lot of the times when we were going into Iraq on our missions and stuff, a lot of things would happen at night. I'd say the first 7 or 8 months after I got home, I could not sleep at night. I would actually get in my car and just drive with the dog.
Immediately when she came back from being deployed, she had a very difficult time transitioning. There were the times where she was startled by something and kind of just wanted to go on her own and not really share what was happening.
I noticed that I was a lot angrier. My anger was very quick to bubble over. I was having problems with being really jumpy around like fireworks and things like that. You know, you smell those same smells, see those same sights again, hear those loud booms again, feel the earth basically rattling around you. Yeah, you basically get taken back there.
She used to receive some medical services at the VA, so that was important at base level. Also, the doctors were able to help connect her with a counselor that she was visiting with on a regular basis.
And talking to counselors, they have told me that a lot of times if you are a victim of MST, then you usually have a lower threshold to PTSD.
So how are you doing? Yeah, that's good. I think she was really able to talk through things with her counselor. Less so now that some time has gone away, but for a while it was really, really hard to leave her for fear of what I might return to.
Maggie listens to me, which is, you know, She's a very strong woman. I'm very blessed to have her in my life. For me, it's like a kind of ebb and flow. Some days are better than others. Some days are pretty crappy. But you keep on going on. You have to keep on moving forward.
When I first met Tracy, I knew that she had always intended on going back to school to finish her education.
I was taking general education requirements at the PCC, and that's how I got to the books program. The class basically takes all that military skill and knowledge that made you be a good service member in the military, and use that in order to be the best you can be in your college career.
It really helped her connect with other veterans, and also just gave her a place to sort of share some of these experiences with other veterans.
There are so many programs that are out here for veterans, but you have to take that first step and get help. That means going to the VA. It's your benefit. You earned it. You deserve it.
Not everyone goes through the exact same things in the exact same way. I don't think there's anyone who's completely unique in the struggles that they're having.
What you're going through is not something that you need to be ashamed of. What you've experienced is something that is going to change you. But in order for you to get to where you need to be for you, you have to take that first step.
So as you can see from that family dynamic there, you had a lot of different things going on and a lot of points coming out. You saw what her, Tracy, relate to you, her experience, what that meant once she came back home, how her wife experienced what was going on, and her fear of leaving the house, her fear of what she might come back to, i.e. someone who quite possibly overdosed or committed suicide in some other way or fashion. So a lot of the components of what we talk about in terms of the impact on the families was exhibited in that particular piece. As we talk about responding to the problem of military sexual trauma, the VA, while it may have its issues, it has a very strong commitment to ensuring that veterans who have access to help in regard to recovering from MST. There's in every VA healthcare system, a designated MST coordinator and contact person. Every VA healthcare provider asks the veteran whether he or she has experienced MST. And again, that's something that may not necessarily occur in the civilian sector. All treatment for both the physical and the mental health conditions related to MST is provided free of charge. And you do not, or the veteran does not have to prove that it's service connected. So that's a real plus in terms of the benefit that's available to them through the VA. And to receive free treatment for mental and physical health conditions related to MST, again, no service connection proof is needed. MST related services are available again at VA medical centers. All of the providers there have been trained in regard to that. Counseling is also available through what we call CBOCs, or the community-based outpatient clinics that are sponsored by the VA. And they're designed to meet veterans where they are, so they don't have to come in to a full center, if you will, to get that help. Nationwide, there are programs offering specialized sexual trauma treatment that can be inpatient or outpatient for those who are in need of more intense treatment and support. And to accommodate veterans who don't feel comfortable when they do like peer-to-peer groups, they have, many of them have separate groupings where if you're men and you only want to be in a male group, that's available to you, and the same for females. So when we talk about non-VA providers, that's again where they're getting their help out in the civilian sector. We want to ensure that their intake personnel, the clinicians, all of the members of that healthcare team are aware of and understand sort of the unique culture and experiences of male and female veterans. We want to create a trauma-informed organization that's welcoming, and obviously that has infused within it the issues or the experiences that veterans may have had as it relates to sexual trauma. Offer or provide referrals to trauma-specific, trauma-informed interventions and services. And again, having that civilian healthcare facility know and understand that veterans with this problem in particular are entitled to care from the VA. And that entitlement of benefits comes without having to have service-connected disability. Engaging female veterans, males, and peer-to-peer support activities, as we mentioned before, sometimes those will need to be gender-specific. Screening for interpersonal violence, including military sexual trauma, PTSD, we'll find that happens in some instances, but not in routine screening of those patients. It's also interesting that they should be paying attention to particular reports of pelvic pain, dysmenorrhea, sexual dysfunction. Again, the complaint may not necessarily say I have experienced military sexual trauma, but they come in with the symptoms of that or the results of having had that trauma, which can be the things that we're mentioning here: pelvic pain, PTSD, sexual dysfunction, etc. Two questions that providers in the civilian sector might use that are non-judgmental would include: did you receive uninvited or unwanted sexual attention, such as touching, cornering, pressure for sexual favors, verbal remarks, etc.? Another question they might use is: did someone ever force or threaten force with you to have sexual contact against your will? Some other recommendations: providers who bring military veteran cultural competence into their interactions with veterans. And that is very, very, very important, that cultural competence piece that our providers and all of those who touch the patient, who are part of that healthcare team, need to be skilled at. Lack of that may indicate that they're unaware of what questions to ask, how to ask them, and what other information they may need to gather. If they're outside of the VA, again, don't think about a client having military experience or how that service might affect their condition. So again, that's why it's important for them to ask very early on, and maybe even in the check-in process, is, are you a veteran? Have you served? There's important to have basic knowledge about military culture. Again, that could mean directing you how you should approach the healthcare of that veteran. How do they define what's going on with them? And it may take a lot for a veteran to seek help, specifically when you're talking about mental and behavioral health conditions, and specifically about military sexual trauma. So a medical complaint, whatever that is, should never be viewed as trivial. And we've seen that video that link goes to. And so here, included in this deck are a number of different references, et cetera. The one that's on top in bold is because it takes you directly to the VA site that talks specifically about military sexual trauma and the benefits for a veteran who had experienced military sexual trauma during their career. And so that concludes what I wanted to present to you today, and I hope that you found it valuable to a certain extent, and it's provided some insights into what this experience really is and the impact that it has on the individual and their families. And so I have two other colleagues who are really going to be the icing on this cake, if you will, in regard to speaking to some additional issues around military sexual trauma. So thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Lewis. We appreciate your insight and information that you provided today. I did have a question that came through. If anybody has any questions, we do have a couple of minutes for questions. So the question I have is, thinking about the trigger of the young man in the store who smelled the candle, are police trained to recognize PTSD in vets? And are vets trained to state, I'm having a PTSD episode when being treated violently by the police?
That's a very interesting question. And the answer to that is no, or at least not all of them. In regard to the training that I do of healthcare professionals, allied healthcare professionals, and social support folks, i.e. people who are a member of that healthcare team, we're also looking at expanding this to first responders, to policemen, et cetera, all who may find themselves in that dynamic with a veteran. Because it is our belief that if they had that training and had that understanding and insights, that many of the conflicts that occur with veterans, whether they're having a flashback and walking around with a gun in a public place or what have you, or charging into an ER and attacking people, understanding what is going on and learning and knowing, being knowledgeable enough about how to diffuse that kind of situation. We also think that that's a lot of the reason why we find many of our veterans behind bars, is because there's that lack of understanding of these particular issues and what some of those triggers may be.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. And with that, I am going to switch back over presenters. I did include Dr. Lewis's email address on here. If you have any further questions for her, you feel free to reach out to her. We will provide a copy of her slides as well. We know that a few people were sending us messages about the videos having a bit of a lag and understanding. So we're going to try and also send the links out to some of those videos as well. So if you wanted to rewatch them or share them or use them for future use, you have access to that information. And with that, I want to introduce our next two presenters. Many of you may recognize them from our last event that we did on serving the unique needs of our minority and underrepresented veteran populations. We had Patty and Ariana join us to be part of a wonderful panel where they shared great information about their work up in Pittsburgh. And I want to introduce them today because they have launched a new movement called MeTooMST.com. And I'm excited to have them kind of share more information about that. To give you a little bit of introduction about each of these individuals, I'll give you a little bio on Patty and Ariana. So Patty joins us as the Women Veterans Program Coordinator. She is with Veterans Leadership Program in Pittsburgh, and their mission is to empower veterans to navigate the transition of life. And in this position, she leads outreach and advocacy efforts, coordinates community partnerships and events, and manages social and supportive programming for women veterans in Western Pennsylvania. Patty is a U.S. Navy veteran. She served from 2007 to 2011 as an AEGIS spy radar tactician, on the USS Gettysburg. She spent 2 years on sea service and deployed to the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Eden. In the Gulf of Eden, she served in the United Nations Combined Task Force 151, which led anti-piracy efforts in 2009. She also co-hosts the podcast What a Veteran Looks Like alongside Ariana Hunter. And then Ariana Hunter is an Iraq War veteran. She's a mom of 3, author, podcaster, and veteran advocate. Growing up as the youngest of 10 children in a family that lived below the poverty line, finding a way to make things happen was just a part of her life. In 2001, at the age of 18, and answering the call of her nation, Ariana enlisted in the United States Army just weeks after the terror attacks of 9/11 and served with the 18th Airborne Corps on the front lines during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Ariana has had a prestigious career in global IT project management, created her own nonprofit, and has also navigated the political establishment running for lieutenant governor. While currently working on her PhD in community education, Ariana serves as the director in the Office of Veteran Services for the University of Pittsburgh. And again, she partners with the panelist Navy veteran Patty Gerheiser and to co-host a new veteran-centric podcast called What a Veteran Looks Like, as well as belong to many civic organizations to include the NAACP, VFW, the Mission Continues, and others. So welcome, you guys. I'm going to invite you guys to join the conversation.
Hi, thanks for having us, Christy. Yeah, thanks for having us. We're really excited to talk about our new initiative, Me Too MST. You know, nothing really changes and if we don't talk about what's real. So Patty and I founded Me Too MST after we started talking and sharing stories of other veterans through what a veteran looks like, and recognize that there's so much healing and so much power, and like taking back your power when you share your story. So this year we kind of came together and said we'd really like to be able to share the stories of survivors. I myself am a survivor of MST, and I have found power in being able to talk about it and share it. And this gives folks who have served an opportunity to do that. It is a website, as you can see below, it's me2mst.com. And service members who have had this experience, who are survivors, can share artwork or poetry or their written testimony, or even record their story and upload it to the website. They can share their names, they can do so anonymously, and it just gives folks an outlet to heal. So I think Patty wants to talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I myself am also an MST survivor, and Ariana and I have been working on several initiatives throughout the year together, and it kind of, the idea spun out of not only what I've been seeing throughout the year within my Women Veterans programming at Veterans Leadership Program, but also our own personal experiences. What I see within the women veterans community here in Pittsburgh is this need for normalizing and validating women veterans experiences, especially the experiences of MST, just because a lot of times they have never been validated. When you think about the way that these kind of things are handled in the military, and just my own personal experience with sharing my story and engaging with therapy and talking about these things, it really allows survivors to have a sense of ownership and pride, not only in their story, but in their military service. I know I was talking with one of my women's groups the other day, and we were talking about how difficult it is to have pride in your military service if your military service included a culture where you felt unwelcome, or you felt denigrated in some way, or you were abused, whether psychologically, emotionally, physically assaulted, right? And so the whole point of this campaign is just to create those types of opportunities for people to share their stories, again, like Ariana said, either anonymously or with their name attached to it, and create a community of support and healing for women and men who are MST survivors.
Yeah, and I think that community is so incredibly important. I know it's been life-changing for me, and I am already getting to see it happen for so many other women and men, and I'm very excited about it. So I hope that all of you who are participating today and are service providers and have connections with veterans who may have experienced sexual trauma while in the military, that you point them our way. And it's going to be great. So right now we're accepting submissions online at me2mst.com. It will be part of a larger campaign that kicks off this fall with a podcast and a full-blown campaign to really help end the stigma and help normalize our experiences. So thanks, Christy. We really appreciate you.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to talk today, and it's a great presentation, a lot of really awesome information there, and feel free to reach out to either of us with any questions about the campaign or any of our programming that we do for women veterans here in the Pittsburgh region.
Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us today and sharing more about your website and movement. It is definitely very much needed during this time, and at all times, I think, especially for our women and male veterans that may need to realize that there's an opportunity to connect with others and share their stories. So thank you for what you're doing, and I hope others continue to connect with both of you further. Thank you, ladies. With that, I want to say thank you all for joining us today. As a reminder, from this event, we need your feedback. I provided a QR code on the screen for you to complete a feedback evaluation survey for this event. Please open your mobile phone. If you do so, I'll show you my mobile phone. Open my mobile phone, I select my camera option, and I hold it up to the screen. Right over where that code is, there should be a link that pops up for you to be able to be directed to our SurveyMonkey feedback. We'd encourage all of you to provide us feedback. As these events, we're going to be continuing to have more of these events this year. And as you provide us feedback, it helps us to improve, make sure that these training events are things that are helpful for you. And it's also helpful to give us feedback on things that you want to see for future events, what future topics would be of interest to you. In terms of next steps, those of you that do need CEUs for this event, feel free to email me at ckennedy@every-mind.org, and I will be sure to email you a copy of your certificate for attending today's training. And thank you guys all for joining us for this session. We did record it today, so we can share the recorded links, and we will also be sharing the slide deck along with links to some of the videos that were shared today. So thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend.